Imagine being called by our Father to deliver a message and being told up front that almost nobody is going to listen. That was Jeremiah's assignment. He was called as a young man, probably a teenager, to speak truth to a nation that had turned its back on our Father. For over 40 years he preached, pleaded, and warned. He was mocked, thrown into a muddy pit, had his writings burned by a king who did not want to hear what our Father was saying. He watched Jerusalem fall, the very thing he had been warning about for decades. And through all of it, he stayed. He did not quit. He did not go silent. He kept speaking because he knew something that carried him through everything the world threw at him. And what he knew is exactly what you need to hear today. Jeremiah 1:5 is where it all starts. Our Father speaks to Jeremiah and says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations." Before you were born, before Jeremiah took his first breath, before he said his first word, before he did anything to earn it, our Father already knew him, already set him apart, already had a purpose written over his life that had nothing to do with his qualifications and everything to do with our Father's intention. That was the foundation Jeremiah stood on for 40 years of rejection. Not his own strength, not the approval of the people around him, the unshakable reality that our Father had known him before the world did. And that knowledge never changed, regardless of what the world said about him. Think about what that meant on the days when everything was falling apart. When the pit was real and the mud was cold and nobody was coming to help. Jeremiah did not have a cheering crowd. He did not have visible success. He had one thing, the certainty that our Father had called him before he was born and had not changed his mind since. That is a foundation that nothing can shake, not failure, not opposition, not the loneliest, hardest, most discouraging season you have ever walked through. Jeremiah 17:7-8 is where his wisdom gets deeply practical. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream and does not fear when heat comes, for its leaves remain green, and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. A tree planted by water. That image is everything. Jeremiah lived in a land where drought was not a metaphor. It was a real, devastating, life-threatening reality. A tree with shallow roots in that environment did not survive. But a tree whose roots had pushed all the way down to the underground stream, that tree was different. The heat came, and its leaves stayed green. The drought arrived, and it kept bearing fruit. Because what was happening on the surface had nothing to do with what was happening underground. That is the picture Jeremiah is painting of a life rooted in trust. The heat is going to come. Nobody gets a life without seasons of real pressure and difficulty. Drought is going to come. Seasons where nothing seems to be growing, where the prayers feel dry, where our Father feels far. That is not a sign of weak faith. That is just the reality of living in a fallen world. But a person whose roots go deep, whose trust in our Father is not surface level, but has been pushed down through years of honest seeking, real prayer, and staying connected to the Word even when it was hard. That person does not dry up when the heat comes. They do not stop bearing fruit in the drought, because their source is underground, and underground is where the stream never stops running. Think about the people you know who carry that quality, the ones who have been through the fire and come out steady, the ones who have faced real loss and still have peace. The ones whose faith does not seem to be affected by the weather of their circumstances. Those are deep-rooted people, and roots only go deep through time, through pressure, through staying planted, even when everything in you wants to pull up and go somewhere easier. Jeremiah knew what it felt like to want to quit. He was not a superhuman who floated above difficulty. In Jeremiah 29, he says, "If I say, I will not mention him or speak any more in his name, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot." He tried to stop. He was so worn down by the rejection that he made up his mind to go silent, to stop carrying a message nobody wanted to hear. And he could not do it, not because he was disciplined enough to push through, but because our Father's word had gone so deep into him that silence was no longer an option. The fire was already in his bones. That is what deep roots look like from the inside. Not gritted teeth endurance, not forcing yourself to keep going through sheer willpower. A connection to our Father so real, so woven into who you are, that walking away is no longer something you are capable of, not because you have to stay, but because you cannot imagine leaving. Here is what Jeremiah's life says to yours today. Our Father knew you before you were born. He knew what season you would be in right now. He knew the drought you would face, the heat that would come, the pit you would find yourself in when you thought you were doing everything right. And He called you anyway, set you apart anyway, wrote a purpose over your life anyway. The rejection Jeremiah faced did not cancel his calling. The pit did not cancel his purpose. The burned scroll, the king literally throwing his words into the fire, did not stop the word of our Father from going forward. Because what our Father authors cannot be destroyed by what people oppose, that is Jeremiah's wisdom. And it is directly for anyone who is doing the right thing and feeling like nobody is responding. Anyone who is staying faithful in a season that is not producing visible fruit. Anyone who is tempted to go quiet because the heat has been on too long and the drought has lasted longer than expected. Stay planted. Push your roots down deeper. Our Father knew you before this season started, and He knows what comes after it. Jeremiah 29:11, which our Father spoke through Jeremiah to people living in exile, says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." He spoke those words to a people sitting in Babylon, stripped of everything, far from home, looking at circumstances that said the story was over. And our Father says, "I know the plans. I have not lost the plot. The future I have for you is good." He is saying the same thing to you today. In whatever exile you are sitting in whatever season of drought or heat or opposition, the plans have not changed. The purpose written over your life before you were born has not been canceled by anything that has happened since. Stay planted by the stream. Let your roots go deep, bear fruit in the drought. That is what Jeremiah did. For 40 years, in one of the hardest assignments our Father ever gave a person, he stayed planted. And the wisdom he left behind is still feeding people thousands of years later. Your faithfulness in this season will do the same. Maybe not in ways you can see right now, but our Father wastes nothing, not one faithful step, not one honest prayer, not one day of staying rooted when everything around you was drying up. He knew you before you were born, and He is not done with what He started.